The viewports, again, are these big gray areas, and you get lots of choices of what type of viewport that you want. So that's the first thing we're going to look at. I'm going to maximize this particular viewport, which is perspective right now. And I'm going to do that by hitting my maximize viewport toggle button down here in the bottom right. That'll make it really big. We're going to look at a few different buttons down here under our viewport controls, and then we'll look at our viewport itself and see how we can change some things around. This first button is zoom, and I use that by holding down the left mouse button and moving my mouse up or down. I can also use my wheel on the mouse to zoom in and out. And you can use the wheel on your mouse to zoom in and out no matter what you're on. So like here, if I'm on select, I can still use the wheel on my mouse if you have a wheel. Otherwise, you can use the zoom button. The next button, I'm going to go out of my maximize viewport so you can see how this one works. The next button is zoom all. And if I push this down and zoom in one viewport, you can see all the viewports will zoom in and out. By the way, this is a pretty high poly object that I've got here. So if your machine is moving a little slow with this one, you can just make a box and play along with the video here. This next button is zoom extents, and whichever viewport you have selected, it will zoom that viewport to fit. So if I've been working in a very small area here and I want to see my whole object, I just hit zoom extents all and it will zoom out. The next button is zoom extents all, and it will affect all of your different viewports. So you can see here, if I've been playing with this and I've zoomed in and out all over the place, this button, zoom extents all, if I click it, it will zoom out and reset all your viewports so they're nice and straight. The next button down here, this one, is zoom region, and I can drag using my left mouse button to a particular region, and I can just work on that region. Now if the grid gets in your way, remember the G button on your keyboard will get rid of the grid so that you can see a little bit better. And you can see I could zoom in here and work just in this area. Also, if you don't like the color of your mesh, you can change that anywhere you see this little swatch. And I can change it to a color that might be easier to see. Okay? Change that back. Oh, let's change it back this way. There we go. So, I'm going to hit zoom extents all again just to zip back out. This little hand is my pan view. It basically moves the viewport around so that I can see it. You hold down the left mouse button and move the mouse to get that to work. This next button is your arc rotate button, and by default it's usually on this one, which has the no color in the center of the little circle. And what this does is it rotates your object around in the viewport. Now if you rotate it around in all viewports like this, which is a bad habit to get into, you'll see all the viewports now have been changed to user viewports. That's not what we want. So we'll go back and hit F for front. This was top, I believe, that's T. And this was the left view, which is L. And we'll hit zoom extents all, and that will set everything back the way that we want it to be. The user viewport is different than perspective in that it's only a 2-axis viewport, where perspective is true 3D. You can also use this little guy here with the yellow center, and what that does is if I select a certain object and now use my center, it will rotate around that particular object. And that makes things a lot easier to manipulate once you get going. So I'd recommend using the little yellow centered one, and you get that by holding down the left mouse button and choosing which one you want. By the way, anywhere you see a little tiny arrow in the bottom right hand corner of any button, such as right there, that will give you more options. It means there's more options underneath that button. And then this one, our last one, was our maximize viewport, and that maximizes the selected viewport. So you can go back, in and out, and maximize a different viewport. Okay? So that's how our viewport controls work. Get used to using the viewport controls, and the one thing you don't want to do is use the select and rotate to move your object around. Move it around within the viewport, not on its own axis. That's bad. You don't want to do that. Otherwise, everything's going to get all screwy and it's going to be really hard to work with. Okay, let's talk about our viewports for a second here. I'm going to rotate this around to get a basic isometric view. This is usually what I work in my perspective viewport. We're in perspective right now. I can switch to my user viewport by hitting U on the keyboard. That's a true 2-axis viewport. And perspective, you can see, is a true 3-dimensional viewport. In other words, all axes are represented. Think of it as a 3-point view for perspective, and user is a 2-point view for perspective. Okay, back to perspective. You'll also notice, by the way, when I went to user, see how my grid is still active there because I haven't turned it off? Now I can switch between the two and the grid is turned off. I hit G on my keyboard to turn the grid off.